So we've talked about Florida State and Clemson suing the ACC essentially to get out of the conference. You could argue that that's not their prerogative. That's not what they're actually trying to do. But at the end of the day, that's pretty much what their focus is getting out of the ACC. They feel like they're falling behind financially and competitively. It might not be the best conference going forward. Now, all of that stuff is subjective and all that stuff can change. But right now, that's their plan is, hey, we got to find a way legally to get out of the ACC and not fork over hundreds of millions of dollars of TV money in the process. And so that's what they're trying to do. But there's a question that I have that's, I guess there's two questions I have. One is like, it's the Joker from The Dark Knight, right? Where he's like, I'm a dog chasing cars. I don't know what I'd do if I caught one. That Clemson and Florida State, I don't think have a great idea of what, I mean, they probably do, and maybe I'm not giving them enough credit, but they don't have a great idea of what they're going to do after they leave the ACC. They just, they hate the ACC so much right now that they're willing to do whatever they can to get out of it, and then they'll figure out what the next step is after that. It's like trying to break out of jail. Like everybody focuses on how to break out of the jail, and then when you get across that fence, you go, "Oh crap! What do we do now?" It's what that thought process appears to be for Florida State and Clemson. But another question I have is, if they are successful, if Florida State and Clemson are successful in getting out of the ACC, and believe me, I'm sure that the folks at the ACC aren't thrilled with the idea that those two schools getting out of the conference is being equated to breaking out of jail, but that's sort of where we are. If they get out, there are going to be other schools that get out too, which I believe leads to the end of the ACC. Now, in reality, it probably doesn't lead to the end of the ACC. It leads to the end of the ACC as a Power 5 conference because they'll backfill with Memphis and Tulane and Rice, and they'll raid the American Athletic Conference and won't be viewed as a Power 5 conference anymore. So it will still be the ACC in name, but it will be essentially a zombified version of the Big East / Conference USA from 2010. Like, you'll get an East Carolina in there. Army and Navy will be in the ACC. And like, okay, great. But it's not going to be viewed as a power conference at that point. But if they're successful, if Florida State and Clemson legally successfully challenge the grant of rights and get out of the ACC, will they be viewed the same way that USC and UCLA were viewed as the conference killers of the Pac-12? Because when USC and UCLA decided we're going to leave the Pac-12, we're going to join the Big Ten, they were viewed almost immediately as these greedy, grubby, I can't believe that they turned their backs on these institutions that they've had relationships with for 100 years to follow the money. How dare they? How could they? And I just wonder if we'll have the same, or if we've been so desensitized to schools in college football, college sports, but for the most part, college football, strictly chasing the money. Because there's this, and I think it's the wrong idea, there's this idea that conferences strictly have to be based on geography, right? Well, it's not 1945 anymore. USC had as many flights to away games in the Pac-12 as they're going to have in the Big Ten. You think USC's busting up the Pacific Coast Highway to go to Corvallis? They weren't. They were flying. Do you think USC was flying to or driving to Boulder? They weren't. At some point, they probably were flying to Cal and Stanford, depending on time of year. Like, for instance, in the Big Ten, Indiana is pretty centrally located in the Big Ten. Illinois is pretty centrally located in the Big Ten. Guess what? They fly to Michigan. They fly to Minnesota. They fly to Nebraska. the idea that because Nebraska is in a similar location to Iowa, therefore they have to be in the same conference, or the idea that conferences should still be built geographically is kind of outdated. And not kind of outdated, it's really outdated. Everybody was, for the most, I guess not everybody, but for the most part, there's a lot of fights in college football, and that's okay. But the idea that USC and UCLA are just, they're such greedy pigs that are, I can't believe that they would follow the money. And how could you not believe that? USC and UCLA saw the writing on the wall, and everybody in college football is kind of doing the same thing. If they're looking around the room at the conference meeting going like, why the hell's that guy here? It's the same thing that happens in if you get dinner with a bunch of buddies, you're sitting around looking at the table and you're like, man, I love that guy. I love that guy. Why the hell is that guy here? Who still invited him? And, oh, he forgot his wallet and we got to pay for him? Well, what? Like, this is the 5th time in a row that he's forgotten his wallet and we've got to pay for his dinner. Why the hell is he still here? Northwestern, Purdue, Oregon State, Washington State. Why are you still here, Vanderbilt? Why are you still here, Mississippi State? And I think it's just going to continue that you're going to see some of the, like, at some point, the power of the Power 5 or the Power 2, if it gets to the SEC, the Big Ten, or the only Power 2, are going to split off into the power of the power, where you're going to get that super league that everybody talked about, but was so, maligned initially that they couldn't do it. But eventually, when it splits off into a Big Ten and SEC, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Iowa, USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington are sitting at the table going like, why is Purdue here? Why is Illinois here? Why is Northwestern here? Why is Minnesota here? Or in the SEC, Texas and Oklahoma and LSU and Alabama, Georgia, Florida are going to be sitting there going, why is South Carolina here? Why is Vanderbilt here? Why is Mississippi State here? Why is Missouri here? And they're going to split off and they're going to do their own thing. Like, once you start to follow the money, you're probably not going to just simply reverse course and be like, okay, actually, you know what? I've found my moral compass and we should really get back to regionality and geographics determining things rather than billions of dollars. The idea that that's going to just turn on a dime is ridiculous. But I wonder if we look at Florida State and Clemson down the line as conference killers, the way USC and UCLA were initially viewed. Now, I think people have softened on that, also in part because the Pac-12 kind of self-imploded at that point, which I think was to be expected when you lose 2 of the 5 or 6 biggest brands in that conference, which is now 4 of the 5 or 6 biggest brands in that conference have now gone away. Yeah, I think it's easy to soften on that a bit because it's going to go away. We're going to say goodbye, and we're not going to think about it all that often anymore. But when that news first came down, there was this like almost moral outrage of how dare 2 institutions of higher learning prioritize profit. Like, yeah, it's not the same thing though, bro. It's not. College athletics is like the college is like 6-point font. In sports is the like 172-point font. Yes, USC and UCLA are colleges, but their football programs are big business. And essentially your moral outrage is how dare these businesses try to make more money? You realize how stupid that argument sounds? But that was the perception immediately. It's like, oh my gosh, they're putting student athletes on airplanes. Like, it's not 1965. What are we doing? They're not getting on the train in a fedora to go play a softball game. You think the USC softball team wasn't flying to Washington State? They were. Now they're just flying from Washington State to Iowa. It's a slightly longer flight. And the football team and the men's basketball team and the women's basketball team are flying probably private chartered flights. Oh my gosh, they're going to fly out and then they're going to miss so much time in the classroom. Probably not. They're going to fly to wherever the hell they're playing. They're going to stay in a hotel, play the game, fly their ass back, and they're home at Sunday morning at 5 a.m. Now, does that suck for your sleep schedule? Yeah. But you're only going to do it 3 or 4 times a year for the football team. It's not the idea that, oh my gosh, we're putting these kids on chartered flights and they're not sitting at the Chicago airport for 13 hours wondering when the bleep they're going to get home. They're chartered flights. They eat like kings in their 5-star hotels. They're not staying at the Red Roof Inn, going to Waffle House. Like, they are catered to in more ways than just food. But the immediate initial reaction was USC and UCLA, horrible. Can't believe they would make this decision. And if Florida State and Clemson do join any other conference other than the SEC, they're going to be in the same boat. They're going to fly to, and they're already, believe it or not, Clemson has not taken 4 buses from South Carolina to Massachusetts to play Boston College. Florida State is not driving through the night so they can go play Wake Forest. They're flying. And that's okay. And if Florida State joins the Big Ten and they got to fly to Ann Arbor, Michigan, they're going to do it. It's just a slightly longer flight. If they join the Big 12, which I think is probably the least likely of the power conferences that they'll join, guess what? They're going to fly to Houston. The idea that we have to make conferences based on regionality and geographics is an outdated thought process. And the idea that you're prioritizing anything other than finances, financial gain, profit, monetary value in 2024 while running these gigantic multi-million-dollar and in some cases billion-dollar businesses is outdated and ridiculous. So I don't think we're going to see Clemson and Florida State viewed as conference killers who I can't believe they would put money ahead of relationships that they've had with other esteemed, prestigious universities. I think I think we've been desensitized to it, and we've kind of looked at the window a little differently than we had in the past and go, oh, yeah, they're just doing what everybody else is doing. But don't forget that it kind of started, and even before USC and UCLA, where Texas A&M and Missouri kind of paved the way for like, hey, by the way, if you're not happy in your current conference, there's financial compensation elsewhere. And then they left, and everybody went, well, wait damn second. Texas A&M and Mizzou are making a lot of money. Nebraska's making a lot of money. And everybody figured out, like, well, wait a second, there could be greener pastures somewhere. Now, whether that worked out for everybody, Maryland, I don't know. But at the end of the day, if Florida State and Clemson are successful, they're going to kill the ACC. But I don't think, and I hope we don't see the moral outrage that we saw in kind of previous iterations of this same scenario. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. Appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. If you are watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you get all the great college football content that we are pumping out here on Saturday Glory. And if you are listening to the podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. Goes a long way helping out the channel. I'll see you tomorrow here on the Daily Huddle with Saturday Glory.